Good afternoon. Grace and peace to you, you, and you. I'm the Reverend Dr. Kevin D. Miller, and I have the blessing and the privilege of serving as the pastor of the Carter Community African Methodist Episcopal Church, located physically in Jamaica, New York, but we are engaged right now all around the world. I'm so very grateful to God that you thought enough of God and of us to join us today for our community experience. The community experience is in its 9th year. And for obvious reasons, we are doing so much of it this year virtually. It is giving us a wonderful opportunity to engage with people all around the world in many different ways. And earlier this week, we were able to have an opportunity to watch the documentary Good Trouble with Congressman John Lewis. And in that documentary, we began to ask some very critical questions and imagine what does it look like to cause good trouble? And many of you know that Congressman John Lewis was somebody who walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge back in 1965. And ever since then, he was engaged in thousands and thousands of protests. He was arrested 45 times, 5 times while he was in Congress. He served for 33 years in the House of Representatives. And he really inspired a nation and inspired all of us to not just be in trouble, but be in good trouble, necessary trouble. So that has sparked our conversation today and sparked this time together and this gathering of panelists to be in a conversation on how to cause good trouble. That's the question that we will be wrestling with this afternoon. So I'm pleased to share with you who will be joining us today in terms of our panelists. The first person that we have joining us today is Marilyn Joseph Jamay. She is the Census Manager for Faith in New York. We also have the Reverend Dan Rodriguez. He is the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Arverne, New York, and also a social justice advocate. And then we have Jennifer Delatour, Program Director for Jamaica Community Partnership. Let me share just a little bit of information about our guests today, because I'm glad that God allowed them to join us. Marilyn served as the first female and youngest president of the Frederick E. Samuel Political Club. Subsequently, she ran for elected office and won in order to serve as a Harlem district leader for the 70th Assembly District, and she served in that capacity for 10 years. Most recently, Marilyn serves on the board of Uptown Grand Central, Neighborhood Women's Collective, and Harlem Advocates for Seniors. Marilyn is also the Deputy Executive Director for the Samuel Foundation, which has 2 programs, Slam Jam, a sports program for girls, and Harlem Got Talent, which is a musical appreciation program. In the spring, she is planning to launch Community Centered Connections, CCC, her own consultant company focusing on sharing best practices in early childhood, parenting, and engagement with clients. Marilyn received her BA from the College of New Rochelle and has completed the Developing Leaders program at Columbia University Business School. She is married, and in her own words, she is raising a daughter to be a future queen in Harlem. Marilyn joined Faith in New York, an organization dedicated to social justice citywide, as their census manager in May of this year. In this capacity, she maintains relationships with members, partners, and other allies of faith-based organizations to ensure a complete count in the census. The Reverend Dan Rodriguez was appointed to serve Bethel AME Church in Arverne, New York, which is affectionately known to many of us as Bethel by the Sea. Prior to his assignment, he was the leader of the Micah 6-8 Social Justice Ministry at the Greater Allah Cathedral in New York. In 2016, Reverend Rodriguez founded D-Truth Unlimited, an advocacy for youth, health, and social justice through counseling, publication, media, training, and speaking. He holds the Master of Professional Studies in Church Development and the Master of Divinity degree from Alliance Theological Seminary. He is also a community facilitator advocating foster care and adoption awareness for the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, otherwise known as FPWA. Jennifer is a Master of Social Work graduate, a 2019 graduate of NYU, New York University Silver School of Social Work. Jennifer received her Bachelor of Science degree in Communication from North Carolina A&T State University. And although her original plan was a career in journalism, Jennifer began her career in the field of social services as a case manager soon after receiving her undergraduate degree. Jennifer resides in Jamaica, New York, and currently works servicing her community as a program director of the Jamaica Community Partnership hosted by Sheltering Arms and Children and Family Services. So I'm so very glad that she is here with us today. In fact, I am glad that all of our panelists are here with us today. And let me, if I could, welcome them to this conversation as we get into this dialogue, as we get into this very rich conversation about some of the things that have been going on in our country. Many of you know, many of you recognize, many of you understand and resonate with the realities that we are facing. We are living in a time where we have to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, racial unrest, financial instability. All of these are factors in what's going on. And just recently, the Democratic National Convention concluded. And when it concluded, it launched right now for us a new time or a new wave that many of us hope will be a change in November. Not everyone, but many of us hope that a change will happen in November. So right now, this week, the DNC completed, and it is historic in nature. It's the first time it was done virtually in this way. In addition, we have seen a major party nominate a woman of color as the vice presidential candidate. So we wanted to spend some time today when we start thinking about good trouble and what's involved with good trouble, really exploring some of these issues through so many different lenses. One, as it relates to certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, certainly as it relates to voter suppression, and also the importance of the census. So let's get into this conversation and into this dialogue. And let me ask our panelists, and I'll start with Jennifer. Let's just go back to this political climate, particularly as it relates to the DNC. What impressed you with that? What kind of impressions did you walk away with when you think about this moment that we witnessed just recently?
Of course, I felt empowered, but it also, honestly, it left me with some questions in regards to wanting to see, hearing what I wanted to hear, but also wanting to hear more from the presidential nominee and the vice presidential nominee, also acknowledging some of their past, but also showing us how they changed, because I feel like that's what I feel like I needed to hear and wanted to hear, that I had these past beliefs and I had these past things that I did. And as Kamala, as a prosecutor, like that was my job and that's what I was doing in my role. But as I've matured in my role as a senator and as I've grown, I know that there does need to be police reform. And here are the plans that I have for police reform. It was a lot of talk about it, but I felt that I needed some more concrete plans, but I know that I have to vote.
Yeah, voting is critical, and that's going to be a critical piece to this election. We will talk more about voting as we continue our conversation today. Marilyn, what were your thoughts?
First, I want to say thank you, Reverend Miller, for this wonderful opportunity, and Carter's doing some great things, so I'm really happy to be here. And also just that it's been a great week. We've had so many weeks of just turmoil in terms of what's happening politically, but the great pride that I think many of us had of people of color seeing our first woman to go up, in terms of vice presidency. So, first responses are excitement. It was great to see our, prior leadership, our former president and our former first lady, and how inspiring they were. It was also amazing, just in having a conversation. I was actually kind of going back and forth with a couple of colleagues and friends and family who I thought were all, part of the choir. And I was amazed to hear how many were, okay, I'm now going to vote. I'm like, you're now going to vote? Well, okay. Well, all right. We accept that. We accept that. You're late to the party, but we'll take that. We'll take that. And so we have to keep that going, that energy going. As we know, it's so important to do, the census, completing that. And as we go into voting, that we are there at 6:01 or whatever your time may be at your voting place and voting early.
Absolutely. Reverend Dan, your thoughts?
Well, I thought while the 2020 Democratic Convention was hopeful and it painted Biden and Kamala a little more holistic, and you got to see the human side of him, I thought they missed the mark with not addressing the progressive folks and voters who are wondering where their voice will be heard. I believe they wasted their time by putting the Republican, what's his name, Cusack, I believe they wasted their time with him, and they could have put a Latino brother up there to kind of address some of the drama and trauma that the Latino voters are going through, and also tap into the progressive voter base, because basically they were tapping into the middle of the road and trying to get those all elusive middle of the road voters. So I'm hopeful. I'm hoping that somebody who doesn't vote stopped on the channel and got inspired to vote, because it's going to take everybody and a lot of law enforcement to override the corruption that's going on in this particular season of voter suppression.
I appreciate you raising the importance of diversity in the ways that it was present and the ways that it was lacking. And a part of this conversation, really, when we talk about good trouble, is how do we engage and pull people in from different faith traditions, different sexual identity, or different ethnic groups, different people with different types of social status. How do we pull them into this conversation? And one of the ways that is so critically important is really centers around the census. The census is one way that this count takes place. And it is disturbing when you begin to look at the numbers, when you begin to wrap your mind around what's going on. So Marilyn, I just want to ask you if you could just say a little bit more, because when we think about the census and we understand, many of us who understand the importance of it, the nation's response rate right now is at 64%. In New York, it's a little bit under 60%. But right now in Jamaica, New York, where we are located, we are under 50%. We are under 50%. In fact, they're launching a contest. It should not require a contest for people to complete the census, but they are launching a contest between Jamaica, New York, and Carnegie, Brooklyn. And whoever gets the most, they're going to get gift cards and all. Why does it take a contest for us to be involved in these very, very critically important issues? So Marilyn, if you could just help frame our conversation around the census, the importance of it, and how we need to engage through a lens of good trouble as it relates to that.
Yes. You know, it's our civic duty, right? You know, so as you mentioned, you know, why should it take a contest, right? As we look at the numbers, and the numbers, as you mentioned earlier, are in the 50s throughout the 5 boroughs. The whole question is, are we going to step up to the plate and perform our civic duty? We have seen the propaganda. We have seen, you know, just a lot in the news and other places around just suppressing the whole census count, right? Immigrants are nervous. They're going, well, maybe not me. Maybe something's going to happen. ICE is going to come out. We want to dispel all of that. We want to make sure that folks know everyone counts. Every single person counts, right? And so that little baby born, you know, a couple of months ago, make sure you count them in, because it matters, right? We want to see our public schools to look differently. We want to make sure that good trouble includes reducing the numbers in school settings, so we don't have overcrowded schools, but that we're able to count it in the right ways. We've seen it, unfortunately, as it relates to the pandemic, that the number of beds that were available were not accurate. Why? Because in 2010, we didn't get it right then. So this is the time. It's 10 years later. We need to get it right. We need to make sure everyone is counted. We also need, you know, you mentioned 50%. When I think about 50%, right, and I think about school, right? Couldn't come home to mama with a 57%.
That's right.
That meant that you were going to be in a little trouble, right? A bad trouble, maybe. Right? So we want to flip that on its head, right? We want to make sure that we're increasing that number, because as it stands now, we're on an average here in New York State to lose 2 seats as it relates to the count, right? So the lower the count, the lower the representation will be. We need to have the right voices in office. And so again, it is so important that when we think about redistricting, when we think about the elected officials that we can put into place, that all matters. You know, the one thing in this new role, you know, as a census manager, that I recognize that it's $675 billion, $675 billion that we're talking about here. And that's shared amongst 50 states, right? Right now, we're standing at 37. Right? And you all are New Yorkers, right, here on the panel, and 37 doesn't work well for us out of 50, right? We like to be on top, right? We want to be getting our fair share, and we want to be at the top of that role, right? And so with that, again, these are all reasons that we know that the census is important. We're asking folks to do everything that they can do to be trusted voices in the community. Everyone on this Facebook Live, everyone on this panel is a trusted voice and has a following of some sorts. We're asking that you use that to make sure that everyone is counted.
Marilyn, before we move over to Jennifer, I want to ask you a question. I know you have some information, some statistics to share, but some people may not know what the census entails. What kind of questions or topics does the census cover, and in what ways is that information used to impact our communities?
Yes. So thank you for that question, because it's as fast as I'm speaking, right? I'm a fast talker. It's 10 minutes, right? It's not a whole lot of information, right? We're asking things about, or the Bureau is asking things around your name, how many people in the home. They're asking about ethnicity. We were, able, in terms of our voices being heard, that good trouble, to make sure to knock off questions around immigration. So there's nothing around immigration. People should not fear that. As the door knockers are going out, there should not be information acquired about your Social Security or your driver's license or anything like that. Yes, in terms of looking at some of these stats, I will share my screen now. And we have, again, a lot of work left to do, right? And so as we look at these numbers, we can see what's happening across the state. These numbers were pulled together as of Thursday, but the resources there. Census Hard to Count Maps, which is a map that's put together by CUNY. And the opportunity there is, as an individual, you can go on that site and you can actually drill this down to your actual community. So we can see what's happening in Jamaica. We can see what's happening in East Elmhurst. We can see what's happening in Canarsie, all across the city, right? By putting in your zip code. But what we can see from the data here, and just real quickly, the NRFU, is representing the non-response follow-up. So right now we're in the stages of enumerators going out door to door and talking to the community about the importance of doing the census and hopefully gathering that information. And so we can see what some of the statistics are in terms of what's happening across the city. And unfortunately, Brooklyn is in the lowest percentile if we put our eyes there for a moment, at 52% in terms of the start, and as of the Thursday date, 8/19, or Wednesday's date, 8/19, at 53%. And we can see what's happening in our very own home of Queens, right? That we were earlier this month at 55%. Overall for Queens, we're at 57%. But again, when you drill down to certain communities, you see that it is unfortunately lower than that. And there's unfortunately also a correlation between, I think, what's happening in the city. And so areas like East Elmhurst, which was hard hit by the pandemic, the health pandemic that is, those numbers are lower. So we think that there, can be some alignment made to like what's happening in the city and why people are not doing the census. But again, we want to turn that on the head and make sure that trusted voices are out in the community and sharing the good word about making sure that folks are doing the census.
So you're raising an awareness, and that's something that we all have a responsibility to do. And I thank you for framing it around this concept of good trouble. Good trouble requires us to be involved. Good trouble requires us to complete the census. Good trouble requires us to be present, to vote. But good trouble also requires us to be engaged with the community on a lot of different levels. Jennifer, I know that a part of what you do is working with community-based organizations on a lot of different levels. Faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, social services, and a lot of different ways. Through your lens, in what ways must we continue or even initiate good trouble in order to address some of the concerns that we're finding in our communities?
So thank you for that question. Regarding good trouble and being engaged in your community, community engagement varies on so many different levels, because you have grassroots organizations, which could just be you and your neighbor and somebody else across the street who get together, and if you choose to go clean up, make sure your street is clean, or if you are the ones who go under the squeaky wheel to your local council member, and then it trickles up and it gets bigger for you being part of your community board, or you go into your local police precinct meetings, and it just grows and grows. But I think the biggest part of being involved in your community is working together. So especially, particularly in Jamaica, what I find is that Jamaica is highly serviced but underutilized. Jamaica has tons of resources for the community, but the community is not familiar with them. And as Marilyn stated, the community needs trusted voices. So part of my program is we have community ambassadors who are members of the community who go out and tell their neighbors, like, hey, you can trust this program. Like, I know this program is great. And if you have a problem with the program, you can come back and tell me, because I have a contact there and I'll make sure that you go. Or we have a connection with the particular agency in particular, and we're like, hey, this was rude, handle that. But community involvement overall involves needing a collective impact. So it's not just one person doing this, but one person doing that. But we have tons of organizations who are working on the same mission, but not together. Mm-hmm. So I feel like we can get a better community organization and going if all the organizations who are working with the same topic can come together and work collectively, because there's power in numbers, which have been seen. We've had petitions and votes and things of that nature when people come out in numbers and voice it and are getting in that good trouble, which is inherently trouble with a purpose and trouble with action, then you can see that. But you also need like collective measurements and things of that nature to ensure that the goals that you're working on as a community and as a whole are being met. So finding ways that you feel that you need to get involved in your community, whether it be you and your neighbors galvanizing to just do something that you find important, making sure your block is clean, or that you want your council member to make sure that your street is a one-way street instead of a two-way street, or that you get bigger and you start going to your community board meetings and finding where you find your niche and your role. But it's important to just get out there, even if the first meeting you don't say anything, and the second and the third, but just becoming involved overall and just learning. Sometimes being involved in your community is just showing up, and you may not speak all the time, but you're there, so they know that the community is not discounted, the community is not uninvested, the community has an investment in what's happening, and people will be less likely to just hand whatever over to the community. So often I feel for Jamaica, a lot of us are not showing up at the meetings, and they just feel like they can hand us whatever because no one's going to say anything. And those who show up, it's only 2 of you, but the community is thousands.
Jennifer, you used the phrase, you said trusted voices. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, in what ways can we build a network of trusted voices, whether it's clergy, whether it's council people? How do we build this strong network of trusted voices? And I think you started to lean into that when you said showing up at these community board meetings. Mm-hmm. But in what ways, what are there some other ways that we can build this network of trusted voices so that we can encourage other people to be involved, whether it is completing the census, whether it is showing up to vote, whether it is making sure that a traffic light gets up in our community? Because it's been my experience. And Reverend Alicia Bailey, I was speaking with her not too long ago. She said something that I thought was critical. When we have a complaint in our community, before they respond to the complaint, they look to see how many people in that community are voting. Mm-hmm. So if there's a strong turnout of voters, and they're going to respond quickly because they realize that there's an impact that is demonstrated through the voice of the vote. So my question to you is, how do we build this trusted network of voices?
So shameless plug, the third Wednesdays of every month, I have a community partnership meeting where we encourage community members and social service agencies to come out together. And again, it's that collective impact model where so often people who sit high are making the decisions for the community, and the community members are not actively engaged in identifying what the problems are. Because I have the benefit that I live in Jamaica, so I walk the streets, I know that this is what the issue is, but a lot of times not everybody has that same vision point. And so people are coming in and saying, well, this is the issue in your community. And I can go back and I'm like, no, this is not the issue in Jamaica. Jamaica does not have this problem. We have this problem, but I know the numbers say one thing, but I know what I see and I know what I'm experiencing. So coming out to those meetings, as well as if you and your neighbors are together in a smaller group, finding a larger group to be a part of and identifying other people in that larger group who have that same vision as you. And I think above all, like I mentioned before, finding a shared common goal, because too often we're demanding things through protest, but there's no measure to say that we've achieved that. Like, we're claiming for police reform. What does that look like? we're telling them that we want police reform, but what we as the people requesting it and demanding are asking for police reform. They could just say, well, we're treating the prisoners better, so now you have police reform. Oh, we're going to share some information about cops who have issues, and now the criminal review board, like they're out hard in the community because like, yeah, we want you to come to our meetings and stuff like that. But that's not exactly what we may be asking for. We're asking you to take these thousands of hundreds and millions of dollars that you're giving to the police and put it back in the community so that the community can put it where it needs to be. Like you push community policing, but are the community and the police really working together?
Sure.
So it's disjointed, and we're yelling things that we need, but without specifics. And I feel like there's so many different moving arms that are asking for the same thing, but not asking for it tangibly and with direct words. And so I feel as though that's what the community needs. As they come together, it needs to be like tangible actions. Like, we're going to this and we're going to go knock on our council member's door and we're going to ask for this specifically. We're going to say, like, you want our vote next November? This is what we need to see in this time frame. And in 2 months, if you don't do it, we're going to be back again. In 2 weeks, we're going to be back again. But coming and not just like showing up, but making sure that we're a united front, because we have like this organization here and that organization here asking for the same things, but in two totally different ways. I'm big on saying that it's much easier to ask pardon than permission. So I'm gonna have to, if I gotta knock your door down, if I gotta kick it in, I'm not gonna, in certain say, I may not say sorry, but it was easier for me to just do what I needed to do than for me to like ask you for it. And so and what I've been pushing for also in like social services is increasing our faith-based involvement, because that's where the people in the community are. And so ministers are that trusted voice for some of for their congregants. And so there are some ministers like yourself, Reverend Miller, who are open to allowing social service agencies in, but there are some ministers who are like, well, we can just pray all of that away. And I am all for prayer and all for healing, but God created therapists and social workers and all these other things that congregants need, because congregants, while we want so much to not be of the world, we're living in the world, and these things are coming to us. And so if your minister is saying it's okay, like God can do all things but fail, but you can also go see a therapist, because prayer and therapy work. They can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But some ministers are like, no, we just gonna pray this away and you're gonna be okay. We're gonna dunk you in the water a couple times and you're gonna be all right. But I think ministers and faith-based organizations being that trusted voice in the community that's saying, like, you don't have to be embarrassed that you asked me for a food pantry, and I have the list of the local food pantries. You need a therapist? I have a list of faith-based therapists who are going to work with you in a Christian or whatever your belief concept. And letting other members not be as, judgmental about if a social service agency wants to come in and talk about HIV and AIDS, like maybe like have them frame what their concept is, that we're not, promoting premarital sex, but these things are happening. And this is where you can go for services if you do find yourself in this worldly trouble. We can pray about it, we can talk about it, but.
Thank you. That's helpful. Reverend Dan, I'm going to come to you in just a second. I just want to encourage people who are watching our Facebook Live feed that if you have a question that you want to ask this panelist, anyone on this panel, we encourage you to put that question into the chat, and we will ask that question of any one of our panelists, whatever those questions may be. Reverend Dan, Jennifer really kind of helped us think a little bit around trusted voices. And you, I believe, pointed us in a direction along the lines of good trouble. As you may know, maybe about a month and a half or so ago, there was a police reform march, a social justice march that took place in Queens that was inspired by clergy and led by houses of faith. We took part in that march. Carter community took part in that march. And one of the things that struck me as we were marching, Dan, is that while we were marching, underneath this umbrella for police reform, underneath the umbrella of Black Lives Matter, is that the people that were marching looked like you and me. but most of the law enforcement officers who were there did not look like you and me. And basically, we're trying to get this police reform in place, but the structure itself does not reflect the communities in many cases, not in totality, but in many cases does not reflect the community in which they serve. So I wanted to ask you, when we look at this lens of good trouble and the things that we need to be mindful of in this season, I think it'd be helpful to kind of hear your thoughts through your social justice lens of how we engage with diversity, how we engage with communities, and if God leads you, how do we address these questions of police reform?
Sure. And thank you for having me in this forum. I appreciate your question. I'm a minister that believes in leading by example. And so at Bethel by the Sea in Far Rockaway, we have a weekly pantry that feeds about 1,000 people. We give out masks. We do food deliveries. Then I sit on the board of the Real Estate Empowerment Coalition in Flatbush, Brooklyn, where we also go out into the community separate from the police in the evening with some credible messengers and try to ice break with giving out masks and then introducing people to job opportunities and job training programs, which is one of them is Hammer to Hammer, where it is a reentry program that is executed under the umbrella of the Real Estate Empowerment Coalition. And so I believe that there's distrust in the community when police don't look like the community. And it is amazing that the police force don't get it at this time. I don't understand what it is about the strategy in community policing when they don't put Black and Latino cops in Black and Latino neighborhoods, but that's just what it is, to coin a phrase. However, to do and get in good trouble, I believe the first thing that came to my mind when I heard the topic of this panel was the song from Public Enemy, Fight the Power. I believe that everybody has a lane that they can be in. Not everybody's going to protest. Not everybody is going to operate out of a house of worship, but everybody can pick an avenue to execute some action and affect change in the community. When I first got involved with the Micah 6-8 social justice advocacy at Greater Allen, one of the things we quickly engaged with some civic organizations was to hold the waste stations accountable on Liberty Avenue. Mm-hmm. And we were successful 2 years in a row getting a new accountability law passed in those neighborhoods and hold those waste plants accountable for polluting our community. It's one thing to show up on Christmas on Merrick Day and give a contribution, but it can't be hush money. If you don't upgrade your facilities to protect the communities, then you're being a bad neighbor. And so leading by example is going to definitely play a big role. Certainly we can speak to our local council people and call in to our representatives to have them take up things like passing the John Lewis Voter Rights Act so that we can have our voting rights protected. We can put the message out that no one is too young to get involved in some good trouble. And we could consistently speak up when we don't see things that are just, or when we see inequity occurring in any system at any time. I think that's important for us to do.
Reverend Dan, you talked about young people being involved in good trouble, and I'm going to bring a question to the entire panel in just a minute. My oldest daughter is 11, my youngest daughter is 6, and this year, my family and I marched in 2 protests, and then also took part in a social justice demonstration. And I give you that background because you talk about young, it's never too young to get involved. A part of what I believe we need to do is to engage young people and show them the impact and the importance of advocacy, to introduce them to some of these things. So we were able to march with members of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity and Zeta Phi Beta sorority. We're able to march with clergy. We're able to march with community groups. And they were making signs and they were shouting and doing all the things that are important. And I give that as a framework and as a foundation to this question I'm going to ask that came in from one of our viewers. And this is the question, and I would love to hear the response from any of you or all of you. The question is this: according to statistics, young Black citizens do not see the importance of voting. What can we do to get them to vote? Let me read it again. According to statistics, young Black citizens, and I would even reframe it just to say young citizens of color do not see the importance of voting. What can we do to get them to vote? Reverend Dan, I'll invite you to start, and then Marilyn and Jennifer, if you would be so kind to jump in.
Well, we could just share the narrative that folks have shed blood, folks have gotten beaten down to earn us the right to vote. And so we don't want to disappoint our ancestors by just disregarding all the work that they put in just to have us dismiss it as unnecessary. It is necessary. We need to continually impress upon our young people how necessary it is, and give them a frame of reference where it is our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, and our great-grandmothers who put their blood, sweat, and tears on the line so that we can have an opportunity to have our voices heard. Because without voting, that is the introduction to having our voices heard. And we have value, and we can't dismiss our value by dismissing voting.
Agreed. And I would just tie into what Reverend Dan is saying in the sense that we must acknowledge the great work our young people have been doing in the last few weeks, right? How do we bridge that gap? How do we look at intergenerational work? And that their work is equally as important to what has happened historically and over time. And so this whole idea of like organizing collectively, and that when they see us by our vote. They see us by us completing the census, and that we must do that collectively, right? And that we can use our young people, or at least I know I can, in terms of social media. You know, I shared the screen just now and it was like, woo, you know. But again, our young people are phenomenal in ways of widening the net, right? And so, you know, Reverend Miller, you talked about the protest, that the census is our protest. Voting is our protest. Right, and as we do that we are, again, doing that collectively, that we are using social media as a way to do that, so that every time they're getting on Instagram, it's not about what you're eating, it's about getting out and voting, right? It's about forums like this, that Carter is leading in the way that everything is virtual now, right? So that we must look at virtual organizing as a mechanism to move these numbers that we talked about a little bit earlier, not only in the census, but as it relates to voting and getting them to the polls, you know, early. And as Michelle Obama said, with breakfast and maybe dinner, right? That, you know, you don't change gears really quickly, right? But that you stay fast on making sure that you are executing on the next step. So again, you know, we've seen a lot with Black Lives Matter. We want that momentum to continue. We want to acknowledge it. And one of the ways that we can acknowledge it is making sure that we're at the polls in November.
And I think it's fair to say that it's not just young people of color, it's just some people of color don't see the importance of voting. And while I do pay homage to my ancestors and my forefathers who did fight for the right to vote, some of the conversations I've been having with my peers is that they fought for me to have the right. And what I do with the right is my choice. So some people are taking that standpoint, but I think having those honest conversations with people in general about what is your distaste and your distrust with voting. Why is it that you, what is it? And a lot of people, it's just that we vote and we're just feels like we're putting in the same people, but from different colored parties. And so then what can we do about that? Like what do we do next? So is there a third party candidate? Then how do we build momentum behind a vision for change then? Like how do we galvanize behind people that you feel will make that change for you? So I think it is necessarily like harnessing and holding space for people to talk about why they don't want to vote and why they don't see the importance, and honoring that, like, because there are some times that, like, as I'm walking into the polls to vote, I'm just like, all right, sometimes I just feel like I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. But being honest with that and holding space to be like that may be the case, but then what can we do about it? What can we do at the midterm election? What can we do in your local election? What can we do in next November so you don't feel that way? But right now, we need you to be on board with the vision to just take what we need to take and hold that right now.
Your insight there is important, and especially when we start talking about voting, because voting is an annual event, right? It is a regular event. Unfortunately, too many of us only show up for the general election. But in the midterm elections, that's critical. Trying to get to know who is on the ballot up and down the line. And I agree, Jennifer, that there are times when you may be choosing the lesser of two evils, but choose the lesser of two evils, right? And push for those conversations and for that necessary change. I see. Reverend Anderson wanted to pose a question. Let's take her question now, and then I have another question from someone who's watching online.
Good evening, good afternoon. I just wanted to add to the question that was already posed and ask the panelists to address the answer as to the importance of the census and the importance of voting from this perspective. So if I think for people and young people in general, if they could see actually how we concretize the physical result from them answering a census, so that $675 billion that Marilyn spoke of, if you answer the census, what do I get for that? Do I get the increase in finances or tax dollars coming to our community to assist in the education in my community? Does that translate into computers and books in the library and teachers and smaller classroom sizes, or the congressional seats I think she mentioned as well? I think they need to see, or people in general, it's wonderful our ancestors bled and died, and we respect that. But I think for some people, they said, yeah, well, that was 50 years ago. What have you done for me lately? And what will this census or this vote actually result in physically and tangibly for me and my family?
So on the one hand, the census creates resources. And then on the other hand, our vote helps us to get the right people involved so that those resources come to our communities. And so if we can frame the conversation around, if you want change, want better for your community, for your family, then how can you play a part in being the change that you want to see?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And right, and that change starts right within their school systems, right? Many of them are, leaning towards remote learning and other options because they know that their schools are overcrowded. So it has to do directly with their education and making sure that we have schools available in our communities to support them. And so again, back to the point that was made earlier, this money is funneled back into communities. It's essential as we think about, not only our young people, our senior citizens as well, and making sure that we have places for them to go and to enjoy their latter years in terms of senior citizen centers, the parks, right? And making sure that we have just the proper lighting and those hoops that they like so much, right? All of those things come into play. And to Jennifer's point earlier, in terms of who do you elect? How about we elect you as a young person, right? We want to make sure that when we are counted, we have the opportunity to get more representation. And guess what? You can run, right, for a seat. And then we can vote for you. And then with that, we win, right? So we want to dispel all of this, voter suppression. We're seeing it on a census level. By the way, everyone, September 30th is the deadline, less than 5 weeks away. We got to get this right. If not, we got to do it 10 years from now, right? And so the time is now, and it is so essential that we get every person, including our young people, in the know. And again, if they're not the head of their household, but they're letting that word be known within the head of the household, to make sure that you take that 10 minutes and that you check off and do what you need to do, either on that paper ballot, online, my20census.gov, or call in. You have 3 options and ways to do this. This is the time. We got to do this. Like
Marilyn,
Nike said, just do it, right? Just do it. That's
what
Nike says, right? Just do it.
Marilyn, underscore your point, because I don't want anybody to miss it. Underscore your point even further, that you said that we've got about 5 weeks to get this right, and that we have another decade before we have a chance to get it right again. Please talk about the importance of that significance of this deadline that's coming up next month.
Right. So again, there are many obstacles that are put in our way. And while many of us on this panel as organizers are fighting it, the deadline was pushed back from the 31st to the 30th, which means, again, that we have 5 weeks to get this work done. Right. And so, again, it's really about making sure that we are going door to door. We are talking to community members, that we're dispelling the fear, especially with the immigrant population, who, again, are just nervous about everything that has anything to do with someone knocking at your door. And not just immigrants, everyone, right? When you got anyone knocking at your door, especially in this time, right? Someone's knocking, you going, well, what do we need to do here, right? Beat all of that. Stay ahead all of that. Stay informed, right, to make sure that you are getting, again, the monies that you need in your communities. I can't underscore enough what happened and what is continuing to happen through this pandemic, right? And especially when I think about, beloved Queens, right, and East Elmhurst, and how many people literally died, right, as a result of not having the right amount of beds in a hospital setting, right? That's the census. Right. If we were counted correctly, we would have enough dollars and funds in that hospital to have the additional beds, to have the right services. It can't get more concrete than that. We cannot afford to lose another person because someone said, you know what? I'm not going to make that call. I'm not going to get online. I can't spend 10 minutes to change the next 10 years of my life, right? And the lives of those around me. So again, it's critical. It's the time to do it. This time is now.
Now, all three of you talked about young people. Marilyn, you even made the point of a young person you've run, you can get elected. Jennifer talked about a young person, you can still be involved. You can go to the community board meetings, you can sit, you can learn, you can listen. Reverend Dan even pointed to the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and said that the voices of the progressives was missing. In a very not necessarily missing, but maybe wasn't promoted in such a forward-facing fashion. But one of the questions that we received that I want to pose to this panel is someone wants to know what are your views on Senator Harris as the vice presidential choice? What does this mean right now for the country? So again, the question is, what are your views on Senator Kamala Harris being selected as the vice president to run on this particular ticket?
So some folks may feel that she was too tough on brothers and sisters when it came time for her being a prosecutor. However, she is the one in place, and we have to, like you said earlier, sometimes we have to pick the lesser of the evils. She was the one nominated, and so we have to go with the team that was selected because when we compare them and hold them up to what we have now, I think that we would be making an improvement. And sometimes we have to accept folks' flaws and see if their positive attributes can outweigh those flaws, and see if our voices can be heard enough so that the flaws of the past won't be the flaws of the future.
Yeah, I agree with Reverend Dan that Kamala, she is the choice. She is who is on the ticket, and who, if we no longer want what we currently have to be in place, this is what we have to go for. Again, I believe holding her accountable. I'm looking forward to the debates. I'm looking forward to if they allow questions to come in from the outside and that, you know, people can pose questions. I'm looking forward to if she decides to do any virtual town halls and people can ask her questions. I'm looking to hear from her about her previous stance and where she stands now. But I don't talk about bad about people in mixed company. So, but Kamala, we going with Kamala. She my Greek sister. We going with her.
You know, for me, you know, the fact that she represents, it's added value, right? You know, we are just in really interesting times, and so you know, it's hard pressed to say that there's something that distracts. It is added value. When I think about, you know, the fact that she has a multicultural background, and that we're looking at almost 2 generations, you know, as we look at Senator Harris versus our former Vice President Joe Biden. That, you know, that's a lot of different viewpoints that are coming to the table. And that, again, we want to hold her accountable. I can already see Carter community and organizations like this, Faith in New York and others, not necessarily that you're having this candidates forum, but that we're saying, hey, this is where we see ourselves, right, as a community. How do you fit into our puzzle, right? And making sure that our voices are heard, you know, readily. So I'm looking forward to just, again, not necessarily looking at the traditional, you know, wait for the debates and you come to me, but that we as a community are using this momentum to move forward and to put out the hard questions early. And the fact that she's, you know, alumni from Howard, not a bad thing. Ain't you? Ain't you? Yeah.
Well, you know, I am also of the opinion when I think about the debates that are coming, that I'm looking forward to the debates, but I believe we're in a moment. We're in a moment where change has to happen. I am supportive of this vice presidential pick. I am supportive of this presidential ticket. That is not to say that I do not have some issues with some of their positions on things, but I am very supportive of the fact that this is not what we have. What we have, I believe, has been divisive and has been destructive. But I do think that we are in a time and in a season where change has to happen. We need to engage with some people that at least are trying to tune their ears to some of the issues that are facing our community. There were some subtleties that took place during the Democratic National Convention that I hadn't noticed before. One subtlety was the fact that each night a woman hosted the evening. So each night that was something different that we hadn't seen before. Something else that I thought they did, which was very, very subtle, was that it said it was the red and blue convention. And as you know, in the past, the Democrats, their colors were blue, the Republicans were red. But here, if you look closely at the graphics, it said red and blue. So to have some Republicans be in there and speaking, I think it was sending a subtle message of how things need to come together in terms of unity. But I do think when we look at this vice presidential candidate and really at this presidential candidate, they've got a lot of work to do. When we start talking about reform, we start talking about Black Lives Matter. When we realize that that voter suppression is still here, when we recognize that John Lewis was marching and marching and marching, and we still have to deal with all of these situations, just a different version of it in 2020. I'm of the opinion that this opportunity cannot be missed. I appreciated First Lady Michelle Obama making the point of and saying very clearly, look, if we don't get it right now, it's going to get worse. Mm-hmm. Right? Before we didn't have anything to look at. Well, now we've got 3.5 years, almost 4 years of this president and this administration, and I don't know what other evidence we need. So for me, and I don't encourage any one of you to say one way or the other, but I know certainly for me, I am in support of this ticket. I am in support of this opportunity. But I do think that the responsibility of change is not with this ticket alone. Responsibility to change deals with all of us right here in this conversation. It deals with the people that are watching, and whether you agree with the perspective of Reverend Al Sharpton or not. That's not my point. My point is this: he said something once that resonated with me, because he said, when you are in this fight for change, you have to be in it for the long haul. You have to show up and show up and show up and keep showing up and keep showing up and keep showing up. And unfortunately, around these issues, sometimes we slip into a place where they're not as prevalent as they once were. You're not hearing about Black Lives Matter and the marches the way we did 2.5 months ago. You're not hearing about it. You're not seeing it. Doesn't mean that it's not relevant, but what it does mean is that it's not on the forefront or the minds of many people as they were 3 months ago. So we all have to be a part of this this change. We have to, from Jennifer's perspective, we need to be a part of it in terms of engaging with our community. From Reverend Dan's perspective, we have to be involved in it in terms of showing up and raising these social justice questions. From Marilyn, from your perspective, it's a travesty. It'll be a complete travesty. And you showed us the numbers. If we're not even meeting the same levels we did, 10 years ago, then we have nobody to blame but ourselves. And I appreciate Reverend Anderson's insight of saying, how do we connect the vote, the census, to community change, to betterment in our communities. Let me give each of you just, because I see we're getting close to time, let me give each of you just an opportunity just to give you a closing remarks and just kind of share your perspective in terms of good trouble and emphasize something you feel that we need to be doing. And Marilyn, I'll start with you.
This has been great, and each time I'm in rooms like this, I am inspired, and again, in just a reflective mode. It is why I became, a district leader many years ago. That was the 90s, and I was angry about what was happening in my community. I wanted to make a change, and it's 20 some odd years, 30 some odd years later, and I'm still in the fight. So to your point, this is for the long haul, right? It's not for a moment, but that we're going to be doing this over time, and that each and every area that we talked about today goes hand in hand. So it's not just census by itself and then we forget about it, but it's census and we're going right into our voting piece, and we're going right into our everyday lives and fighting the powers that be in terms of things that we think, we need to change. So again, in terms of my young people that I think about daily, the hashtag is the census is my protest. Hashtag the vote is my protest. Hashtag, Queens counts. Hashtag Brooklyn counts. Hashtag New York counts. Hashtag faith in New York counts. We all matter. We have, to again show our voice. And it's, important for us to look at the census to be one of those opportunities to do it. I would challenge everyone after you get off this call today to call at least 10 family and friends and say, listen, have you done the census? And hopefully each one of them will say yes. And then you ask them to do the same for 10 more, right? And that we continue that, each and every day in these next 5 weeks, because we're going to need it as we, move forward. That we use social media, again, as a tool, a digital tool for change. We mentioned the fact that we are all trusted voices. So the phones, they are, an asset to us. Take them out, do a video, and share that on Facebook, on Instagram with your friends and families about the importance of the census and the importance of voting. And we will see change in this community. I look forward to it. I look forward to seeing each one of you in the fight, and that we're going to get on the other side of this.
Excellent, excellent. Reverend Dan, did you have a closing thought that you wanted to share?
Sure. I just want to encourage the beloved community to be encouraged. I believe this is our time. I believe, as you said, we can't put all the onus, put all the responsibility on our elected officials, because we can show President Cheese Doodle that this is the real inside job. And if we don't participate in this process, we'll be doing nothing but giving lip service to the trials and tribulations that lie ahead. This is an inside job. Get involved. Don't forget to apply for absentee voting because of the reason of COVID-19, so that you can have your voice be heard. Thank you for this opportunity, and continue to stay active and stay involved.
Thank you, Reverend Dan. Jennifer.
Again, thank you for this opportunity. And I think above all, I just want to leave that community is on all levels, and it's your participation in the census, it's your participation in voting, and understanding that it is our right and it is our duty, but holding space for conversations for people who are standing in opposition, holding space for there to be opportunities for learning, for there to be opportunities for conversation, and to just get out and be involved in your community any way you feel comfortable. And as you feel comfortable, you'll grow and participate. So if the smallest thing that you can do today is to complete your census, and the smallest thing that you can do in a couple of months is to either complete your absentee ballot or stand on the line to vote, get involved, find out how you can link up with your neighbors and do something, but know that the community is yours. And your voice is important, your voice matters, and that it matters not just in this general election, but it matters in every election in November.
Excellent, excellent. I want to thank you all for your time today. Let me, Reverend Anderson, I thought you wanted to say something. Okay, great.
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, let me thank our panelists today. Let me thank Marilyn Joseph Jamay. Let me thank Reverend Dan Rodriguez. Let me thank Jennifer Delatour for this wonderful and excellent, and I think deepening conversation. It has pushed our thoughts, it has pushed our understanding of so many different things, and I'm grateful to each of you. And I realized as you were talking that a couple of things need to happen. One is we have to work for that beloved community that Jennifer was talking about. Two, Marilyn, we need to accept this challenge that you gave to us, where we need to call 10 people whenever we speak to somebody after we say hello. Did you do the census? And if they say yes, good. Did you ask somebody else if they did the census? So we accept that challenge today. I'll make sure that is, and it has been, quite frankly, it's been a part of my regular conversations on Sunday morning, but I will continue to do that over these next 5 weeks. And certainly Reverend Dan Rodriguez, we accepted the challenge of having to hold people to the fire, to be engaged. And I realize even as you were talking, as all three of you were talking, that there's added work that I must do. So we've started a network here today. So I'm going to ask you all to keep me informed, and I will keep others informed. I know Jennifer is always sending me information, so I receive that information. We can share that information. But Marilyn, when things come up in terms of how Carter community can help, or more broadly, our community can be involved, if you forward that to me, I accept the responsibility to be engaged in that way, in whatever way that we can. And Reverend Rodriguez, you don't have to march alone. All right, you don't have to be out there by yourself. Sometimes we think we're on this journey by ourselves. But I'm certainly grateful to each and every one of you. I want to share your information with folks so that they know how to get in touch with you directly, because this is not something that we do in isolation. But I'm going to share your information with them. And even as I'm doing that, I want to thank all those persons who are watching, but I especially want to thank Reverend Greta Gaynor Anderson, who joined us today, Minister Tanisha Lawrence, who joined us today, who helped in pulling together this conversation today. And again, our guest today was Marilyn Joseph Jamay. She is the census manager for Faith in New York. Reverend Dan Rodriguez, he was the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Arverne, New York, also a social justice advocate. And Jennifer Delatour, who is the program director for Jamaica Community Partnerships. Let me share with you information so that you can be in contact with them. Certainly you can find out more with Faith in New York, and these organizations, you can find them online or find them on Facebook, either one. But Faith in New York is located in Corona, New York. The telephone number there is 718-426-6564. And you can reach Marilyn at faithinnewyork.org. Let me stress that just like so many organizations, many of our organizations are working virtually. So it would be best in many cases, if you try the telephone number and cannot reach them, to send an email to them as well. I'm sure they would be probably more responsive to the email, since many of us are working and operating virtually. Reverend Dan Rodriguez, who is the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Arverne, his email address is BAMECA pastor@gmail.com. So Bethel AME BAMECA pastor@gmail.com. Telephone number 718-474-6564. And you can certainly reach Jennifer Delatour. And you see the telephone number there with Jamaica Community Partnership, which is a part of Sheltering Arms Children and Family Services in Jamaica, New York. Telephone number that you can reach her directly. You can reach her directly at 917-589-3851 or at jdelator@shelteringarmsny.org. So we are grateful to each one of our panelists. And let me also tomorrow, well, actually, before we get to tomorrow, let me give you some information, some important information. We talked a lot about the census. We talked a lot about absentee voting. In terms of the census, I want to urge you, I want to encourage you. You heard today the importance of completing the census. You can do this by going to my2020census.gov, or you can call 1-844-330-2020. Please, family, friends, brothers, sisters, neighbors, complete the census. I am pleased to say I have already completed the census. I did it some time ago. I know the importance of it. Please complete the census. Go to my2020census.gov or call 1-844-330-2020. You can be in and done in under 10 minutes. Under 10 minutes, and it will affect the resources we have in our communities. Please complete the 2020 census. In terms of absentee voting, if you haven't registered to vote, you need to register to vote, and you can request an absentee ballot, and you can do that now. Wherever you are, I hear you shouting now. So you can do that right now. The deadline to request is October 27th. Don't wait until October 27th. Do not wait until October 27th. You can request your absentee ballot today. Today. You can do that today. Reverend Dan reminded us that because of the situation that we're living in terms of social distancing and the coronavirus pandemic, you can do an absentee ballot. You can check that box that you are not comfortable coming out in this environment and in this situation. So you can request it today. Do it today. The mailings of the ballots will begin September 18th. You can request it today, but don't look to receive your ballot until after September 18th. You can get your ballot by going online to www.elections.ny.gov, or you can call 1-866-868-3692. Please. One of the things you heard President Obama say, you also heard First Lady Michelle Obama say, vote like your life depended on it. Vote. Please get out and vote, and encourage our brothers and our sisters and your neighbors to get out and vote as well, because this election is critically important. I want to again thank all of our guests, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And even as I am thanking you, I'm also sending an invitation to you as well. Community Experience TCE 2020 has been extraordinary. It has been this event with these panelists, and we've done things throughout the community throughout the week. We want to invite you to join us tomorrow morning right here on this Facebook page for an international worship service. But I realize, as I've been growing in my understanding, this is really a global worship service tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. And I'm so glad that God gave us this opportunity. And I don't know if it's been done anywhere before, but I know it's something that is very unique, what we will be doing tomorrow. We will have 5 preachers from around the world preaching live as a part of our worship service tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We will have a preacher from South Korea, a preacher from Guyana, a preacher from Ghana, a preacher from the United Kingdom, and a preacher from Bermuda. 5 preachers from around the world giving God glory. So we invite you, if you can and will, to join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. as we do this international, but better yet, this global worship experience. I tell you, God is God in Jamaica, Queens. God is God in Jamaica, the country. God is God in South Korea and in Ghana and Guyana and the United Kingdom. I tell you, in Bermuda, I tell you, God is still God. So we invite you to be a part of our worship experience tomorrow morning. And if you will allow me, as we finish our time together today, let me offer up this word of prayer of thanksgiving to a wonderful God. Let us pray wherever it is you may be. Gracious, loving, and wonderful God, we do give you thanks. We do give you honor and we do give you glory. Thank you, God, for allowing us this time together. Thank you, God, for the insight that you gave through Marilyn, through Reverend Dan, and through Jennifer. Thank you, God, for them. I pray, God, for their outreach. I pray, God, for their impact. I pray, God, for their families. I pray, God, for their witness. And God, I also ask for their covering. And God, in asking for their covering, I ask that same covering for me, for the people of God called Carter community, for all those who are watching right now, whether they are near or far, but in this virtual way, we can ask a unique blessing upon every single person. So God, watch over us. God, keep us. And God, if it's your good will, allow us, God, to be able to connect again in the future. So God, we thank you. Jesus, we thank you. Holy Spirit, we thank you. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you again for joining us. You will have the opportunity certainly to watch this again. It will be airing Tuesday at 6:30. So we will play it again. That way you can get this information, share it with your friends, share it in your social media sites. But we want to get the word out of the great things that Marilyn Joseph Jamea is doing, the Reverend Dan Rodriguez is doing, and Jennifer Delatour is doing. So thank you all for joining us. To God be the glory. Take good care and God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.